Welcome everyone to the MaterClass on competitiveness and clusters. My name is Pablo Colazzo, Professor Pablo Colazzo. I'm delighted to join the Women Economic Forum. Um, I'm grateful to my colleagues and the directors of the forum, and I'm pleased to have um, this opportunity to share some insights on competitiveness and clusters as tools for regional and for economic development, for regional economic and social development. Um, we will be together for the next hour or so. Um, I will organize the conversation uh, on along the lines of some insights on the meaning and the scope of competitiveness, and then on the back of that we will introduce the concept of clusters and jointly reflect on how they play out in practice, how they operate, and what their expected impact is, how they may influence and how they indeed they do influence regional development on both economic and social grounds. It is a wonderful opportunity to have this platform here to connect with you. Clusters are a very powerful tool to unlock competitiveness, especially in our region, in the Caribbean, in Latin America. We very much need to foster local development, and women have a central role to play in that challenge. So this is again a wonderful, one of a kind opportunity to engage in a conversation with the audience, especially with the women that are joining the forum for the first time in the Caribbean. Um, it takes competitiveness is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So it takes policy to put in place the right policies and the right incentives, but ultimately it is down to the firm. It is down to the entrepreneurial spirit of men and women to organize production in a way that they really maximize efficiency and stand out both locally and globally. Clusters, as a matter of fact, become this bridge, so this stepping stone, if you will, for local ventures, for local firms to compete, to stand up and compete at the global stage. So this is arguably again a wonderful time to address this topic, and it is an opportunity to this conversation that we are having is an opportunity to look back at if you will, at the building blocks of competitiveness, the meaning, the scope of competitiveness, and then once again we will introduce clusters and explain how they operate in practice and how they may become a very powerful and high impact tool to unleash economic and social progress. Um, when we talk competitiveness, and let me refer to the slide that you have in front of you. Um, when we talk competitiveness, we are talking about productivity. So we are talking about how we combine inputs to maximize outputs. So in the long run, and this is what we are talking about when referring to competitiveness, we are talking to capturing these long-term efficiencies, these productivity gains that lie within the firm. So as hinted earlier, um, we may put the right policies in place, but at the end of the day, it is down to the firm, it is down to the company to really unlock competitiveness, because competitiveness lies within the firm. So this is why you might have noticed in the opening slide, um, we, we talked about the microeconomics of competitiveness, and indeed, when I introduced myself, I should have referred that this material that I'm sharing with you is the material that we have developed as part of the microeconomics of competitiveness network, the competitiveness network of Harvard Business School. I'm an affiliated faculty at Harvard Business School, and I chair the global membership of this network. So when I was invited to to join to give this master class in this event at the forum, um, I basically selected a sort of a few slides out of the material that we developed in the network. And once again, the network intends to point out by calling ourselves at Harvard the microeconomics of competitiveness network. We want to underline that competitiveness is a micro uh, outcome. So it happens within the firm. It has a micro uh, a micro essence. It lies competitiveness lies within the firm, and this is why indeed any firm can strive to unleash these productivity gains, because it is ultimately up to the individual firm to organize its activities, to link up its set of resources and capabilities in the proper flow within the value chain, within the boundaries of the firm. And on top of that, what we will refer and kind of hint as we move forward in our conversation today, that indeed there are opportunities to increase productivity and as a result boost competitiveness by also teaming up with other firms. So competitiveness at the end of the day, again, happens within the firm, but it can also be achieved. Uh, that competitiveness outcome can also be achieved by linking up and by cooperating with other companies in the supply chain. So bear in mind that here we are talking about two levels, if you will, um, in the production flow. We are talking about the individual firm, the value chain, which is a proxy, the way we represent the individual firm as a set of activities, the flow of activities that are conducted within the firm. So that individual firm is proxied, represented by the value chain. But then when you link up all the different firms along the industry, then what you have is the supply chain. In other words, the chain of supply and client supply and client and supply. So the chain of value added, if you will, along the industry from the initial input to the final output for the final consumer. So that chain of activities, that chain of value added along the industry from the initial input to the final output, this is the supply chain. And what we argue is that competitiveness, even though it ultimately comes down to the individual firm, it can also be achieved by connecting the different value chains, the different firms along along the along the industry, along the supply chain. So bear this in mind, that we will be connecting the individual firm, the value chain, and the supply chain as we move along. So if you if you're going to think of competitiveness and you're going to narrow it down to a single word, so if you're going to single out the defining feature of competitiveness, so what defines competitiveness, here you go, it's productivity. And productivity, in plain English, is just the efficiency with which you turn inputs into outputs. So you have inputs, namely labor, capital, technology. You combine as a firm. You combine these inputs um, to get a given output. The relationship between the value of this output and the cost of those inputs is what defines your productivity. Um, it goes without saying that what you want is to maximize that ratio, so that the relationship between the value of your output and the cost of your inputs is increased, so that ratio is improved. And the challenge of improving that ratio is what defines competitiveness. So it follows that you can measure competitiveness at the firm level. So you can measure the output input relationship in a given firm. You can scale up and measure competitiveness in an industry. And you can also look at competitiveness through a geographic lens, if you will, and talk about local competitiveness, regional competitiveness, and eventually you can add up, aggregate up all the way to the nation level, to the country level, which is usually the metrics that we have when we talk about competitiveness, and we refer to productivity figures, to productivity metrics. We typically aggregate them up at the country level. So you're probably familiar with the competitiveness index. Some of the competitiveness index out there, like the World Economic Forum or the IMD or a few others out there, they all measure competitiveness by looking at productivity at the country level, aggregated all the way up to the country level. But you may do, again, you may measure competitiveness at different units. And once again, bear in mind that when we are talking competitiveness, at the end of the day, even if you may measure it at different units of a scale, competitiveness as such results from the way you organize your inputs and the value of the output that you get out of the firm. So competitiveness is a firm level outcome. In the forum, as I was told, you're also going to be talking about other related issues. Particularly, you're going to be talking about shared value. I wanted to make a brief reference and to link up a bit my remarks to the conversation that you're having on shared value, because when we are talking competitiveness, and shared value has been indeed a concept that was developed by Professor Porter and was presented. It is widely used by our community at the Harvard Business School, because we very much believe in the competitiveness as the flip side of prosperity. So competitiveness and prosperity are ultimately, the outcomes of they are the flip sides of the same coin, if you will. Um, Economic progress is not going to be sustained if you do not achieve social progress at the same time. So when we are talking competitiveness, we indeed mean ultimately competitiveness as a way to also increase local prosperity and eventually, adding up prosperity for the host community and prosperity for the location that we are talking about. What follows in the next minutes of this masterclass is, however, some insights on how to organize the firm and how to uh, shape up policies and initiatives for competitiveness with a focus on clusters. And indeed, we're going to be uh, preaching, if you will, or we're going to be making the case for competitiveness. But you should bear in mind that if you want competitiveness to remain so, indeed, to be a long-term outcome, you need to combine also social progress. So competitiveness and prosperity should be ultimately hand in hand. So one thing is the initiatives to boost, to improve competitiveness, and then another thing is how you allocate the gains, these productivity gains that are achieved through competitiveness practices, or say through development, as we are advocating today. Then you very much need to make sure that if you're gonna sustain that advantage, if you're gonna sustain that competitive advantage over time, you really need to make sure that everyone partakes in those gains, that all are better off, they benefit from those competitiveness gains. So competitiveness and prosperity, they ultimately, they eventually need to go hand in hand if you want competitiveness to prevail and to be sustained in the long run. So this is a brief, if you will, graphical representation of the dynamics of competition. Firms on the right hand side of the slide. So you have the firm, you have the value chain. Firms operate in a given industry. The way we represent the industries through the five forces. For those of you that are familiar with the five forces framework, you know that it is a way to represent the dynamics of competition at the industry level. So that's why we use the five forces as a proxy for the industry. But this is, if you will, the pitch. So the playing field, the industry. At the end of the day, competitiveness is achieved within the firm. So if you want to unlock competitiveness, you need to identify a position in that industry that allows you to stand out. So competitiveness is about being unique, and that uniqueness results from the way you organize your value chain, either by means of the resources that you combine, the assets, the resources and the capabilities that you combine in in the firm, in the value chain, and oftentimes by the way you link up, you sort of lay down those resources. You combine those resources in a flow of activities in the firm. So you may win, if you will. You may stand out by having a proprietary or a resource that is proprietary and that gives you that advantage since no one else can access that resource. Um, but oftentimes companies end up standing out or end up winning, if I may say so, because they combine those resources in a unique fashion. So competitiveness, to sum up, competitiveness again is achieved by identifying a unique positioning in in that pitch, in that playing field. So the industry is the playing field, and the individual firm is faced with the challenge of carving out, sort of spotting that unique uh, position in the industry that allows the company to stand out. Typically, this uniqueness is initially built on either being the lowest cost player. So you win on cost. So you are the, the one that a company, you're the one that delivers the same value but for a lower price. So you either win on price by delivering the same value at a lower price, or you win on differentiation by delivering a different type of value, not the same value, but a different type of value for a premium. So you either come up with the same value proposition as your rival, but you offer it at a discount, at a lower price, or you have a something that allows you to stand out by way of, again, either a resource or a feature or a way of either the product or the service, which is lately often underlined as servitizing the value chain. So you may very well win by offering something, either in the product or in the service that allows you to be perceived as different, as unique. Either way, the outcome is that initial competitive edge, that advantage that you capture early on, but in the dynamics of competition. So, as we hinted earlier, competition is not, and competitiveness as the outcome of that dynamics is not a one-off. It's not a sprint. Is a marathon. Is a continuous game. Indeed, more than a marathon, because uh, it is indeed a uh, never-ending game in the sense that whenever you come up with an edge, you are bound. You are very likely to be challenged by a rival, by another firm that will try to set you off, will try to neutralize your advantage. So I always refer to competition, if you will, in these two stages. The kickoff, in which you make your choice of winning on cost or winning on differentiation, and then when you set that in motion, you move to the dynamics of competition, in which you have to make moves and counter moves, and you follow pretty much the logic of game theory, in the sense that you ought to anticipate, you have to anticipate the moves of your rival, to try to stay ahead of the game. And the game is a continuous. So in that dynamics, when a competition enters that dynamics, the winner is the one that can indeed streamline activities and can unlock uh, productivity, time and again. So the name of the game, if you will, is no longer one of just one-off competing on cost or competing on differentiation, but it becomes a matter of sustaining that advantage by way of capturing those or unleashing those productivity gains in the firm, by improving the way you run your operations, by again improving the output-input ratio for your marketing activities, for your any of the supporting activities, be them IT, finance, uh, you name it. So we will come back to the value chain in more detail in a few minutes. And once you are again in the dynamics of competing, um, it's a matter of staying ahead of the game uh, by 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 means of productivity. So what you what you want is to achieve, to identify that sweet spot in the industry that makes you unique. Mhm. So we often see firms in also in my professional practice, when working with firms, I tell uh, managers, I tell entrepreneurs, um, don't mimic what other companies do. Take best practices as a benchmark. This is what they are, but then develop your own, build your own uniqueness on top of that. So yes, you need best practices to be on top of the game, and once you reach that uniqueness, either by way again of the resources. You may win because of the uniqueness of your resources, but you may also win with the same resources if you organize them differently in the value chain, in the firm. So that uniqueness, out of organizing the resources differently, by combining them differently, is where the formulae, or these ideas around clusters then come into play, because we will see that through organizing production in these networks, in these local networks that we define as clusters, then you are likely then to improve your own value chain, and unlock that uniqueness that you need in the long run to win for good in the long run. So to sum up this, if you will, this first part of our conversation, um, let us then look at the competitiveness at that continuous game. So if I may go back to this idea that we introduced a few minutes ago, and reflect for a minute that if you want to stay on top of the game, and if you're going to stay ahead of your rivals, you need to keep on moving. So if you can picture this idea of competition as as a dance, if you will. You need to keep on dancing, and you need to keep improving your you know your rhythm, and improve the way in which you organize and you run your business. Um, and this is the very definition of innovation. So what you have in front of you is this, if you will, this incremental journey that reminds us that companies early on compete on factors, and they try to tap into the best talent, into the best labor, the best skill, the best workforce, the best labor with the technical capabilities that are needed for the job. Um, they try to as well combine these labor inputs with capital, with technology, but eventually in the long run, if you narrow your game to competing on factors, um, you're bound to have a hard time standing out, because companies are have an easier time. The companies are more likely to catch up um, on labor, on any of the input factors that make up for the set of inputs um, in any given company. So this is, if you will, easier to replicate. So it doesn't make you unique. Um, if you have labor with certain capabilities, any other company may eventually replicate those capabilities and build up a similar workforce in terms of a set of skills. Um, if you happen to get some funding at at a lower cost, and reduce your cost of capital, eventually other companies may also achieve the same goal. Technology, other than being proprietary or somehow patent protected, or with other if you will tools to fence it off, also ends up spreading out and disseminating. So competing on factors is, in the long run, is most likely leading to a sort of a no competitive advantage type of outcome. Companies that keep moving um, are likely to build up efficiency, and this efficiency driven stage that you have in the middle of this uh, incremental path. um, the middle stage of efficiency driven competition is achieved by building up technology, and sort of making incremental leaps by investing in technology, because technology is you can set the pace, if you will. If you have the means, you can make significant leaps in terms of productivity gains, in terms of output inputs, um, on the back of technology. So companies may achieve at least a temporary advantage by investing in technology intensive assets, and bringing technology into sort of as a core driver of the value chain. But eventually, what you want is you want to keep on moving, and that analogy of keeping on moving and changing, changing the way you run your activities in the value chain. Um, Always looking for ways to do things better, to increase efficiency, to reduce input cost or increase output value. This is what defines innovation. So I always refer to innovation by means of this analogy to change, that you keep on moving. And this is the idea. Innovation is the ultimate driver of competitiveness. If you're going to stay ahead of the game, you very much need to keep on moving. So to keep rebalancing and reshaping your value chain, reshaping the way you run your activities, reshaping your pool of assets, your resources. And one way to capture that, to get to that outcome is clusters. So in the remaining of the conversation, we have just a bit over 20 minutes left. I would like to share some insights on clusters as drivers of competitiveness, and again as a means to unlock or to unleash this innovation-driven competitiveness. Before we formalize the concept of clusters, and let me, as noted in the opening, let me put forward a sort of a working definition, so we are on the same page. And then on the back of that, I will share some insights, mostly out of practice. So you may hopefully get to feel and get to sense how these networks, how these clusters play out and operate in practice. One final thought on competitiveness. We mentioned earlier that you need to have the right the right framework, if you will, for competitiveness to happen. So if you want a firm to really build up innovation capabilities and translate those innovations into a competitive advantage, you need to offer the right business environment, the right context, and that has to do with the level of openness of the economy. That has very much to do with the context, with the regulatory framework. So we are assuming a market economy, and in that market economy, you need some sort of baseline attributes, namely rule of law, accountability, transparency in the way business are carried out, some if you will, macro conditions in terms of institutional framework, in terms of also by way of inputs, some public goods such as education, health, infrastructure. So these are input factors, and these are part of the context that are taken for granted, and they make up for this business environment that we will come back to towards the wrap up, towards the closing of the conversation today, as a reminder that if you want competitive companies, you need to have that proper setting, that proper business environment, which is largely or to a significant extent shaped by the government. So this is why we tend to put a significant weight in the competitiveness equation we typically put a significant weight on policy because you need the right steering, you need the right public policies to again to shape up this framework, this business environment. So competitiveness is to a significant extent a contingent on government, on public policies. But at the end of the day, um, you may offer the best possible context, but it is up to the individual firm to really exploit that context and really maximize efficiency, maximize the output input ratio within its boundaries. So it is up to the individual firm to make competitiveness happen, so to speak. Again, it happens within the firm, but you need that precondition, that contextual framework, that context, which is largely provided by the government by way of public policy. So I typically make this analogy of referring to competitiveness as a co-creation process in which you need to dance. So the public sector and the public the government, the public sector and the corporate sector, the private sector, public and private sectors, they need to be in sync. They need to be synchronized and they need to dance. They need to complement each other. So this is the, if you will, the equation of competitiveness. So let us now zoom in the definition of a cluster. We hinted earlier that when we are talking about clusters, we are talking about a local network. So it is indeed a local network. So a cluster is an agglomeration of firms. So it follows that it has a geographical component. It's a geographical group of interconnected firms in the same industry. So we have to define a cluster. We are talking here. So for those of you that are familiar with the term, when we talk clusters, you may think of a group of a group of co-located entities, if you will. So we use the term cluster to illustrate this idea of a group of things, of a group of, well, in this case, a cluster is a group of firms belonging to the same industry. So this is one of the defining attributes. So the membership of the same industry. So clusters are industry specific. So when we are talking of a cluster, we are talking of a single industry. The wine cluster or the flower cluster or the fashion cluster. So it is industry specific. And the other axis, if you will, this is why if you can picture sort of a, if you will, two axes, the two axes that define a cluster are industry on the one hand and geography on the other. So we are talking about an industry specific set of co-located firms, which now brings the location dimension into the picture. So a set of a group of firms in the same industry in the same location. So this is why clusters are typically studied in the broader context of geographical economics, because we look at clusters as a tool to improve, to foster a local development. So by way of co-locating firms in a region, we can achieve, we can unlock efficiencies that couldn't be achieved by fragmented firms. So if you were to think of co-location as opposed to kind of a relocation or fragmentation of firms, what you have in a cluster is a group of firms that collocate, that agglomerate in a given region, and because of that proximity, as hinted in the slide in front of you, because of that proximity, what we have is the opportunity then to link up firms, to identify commonalities and complementary activities. So the idea is that um, each individual firm in that location, by being close to each other, can tap into productivity gains that result from that proximity. So in a cluster, proximity becomes the the way, if you will, or becomes the driver of competitiveness. Proximity is what allows companies to exploit these synergies, these complementary activities that again leads this synergy or this complementary activity eventually leads to to a productivity gain that each individual company in the network can internalize. So this is the interplay of the individual firm, the value chain, with the industry. So the individual firm in the broader context of the supply chain. Each individual firm linking up and exploiting synergies and complementary activities with firms that are geographically close by. So geographically um, close in close vicinity with each other. This leads to these opportunities to increase efficiency, to increase the output-input ratio that firms that are far apart from each other, so say a firm in Puerto Rico and a firm in Mexico, may not, that proximity may not lead to a synergy that can be exploited because of the sheer distance, geographic distance between these two firms, even if they are in the same industry, in the same supply chain, even if they are next to each other in the supply chain. So imagine a supplier in Mexico that provides, some inputs to a client in Puerto Rico, but the fact that they are geographically apart from each other is likely to prevent them from exploiting these proximity advantages. I mean, all the way from sharing warehouses to reducing logistics because they are nearby. But in the case of a company in Mexico and a company in Puerto Rico, then we will not be able to exploit, to tap into these advantages. A cluster then, a cluster implies proximity, implies co-location, and implies cooperation. So if I may introduce then in the remaining of the conversation this idea of competing and cooperating at the same time. So we've talked about location, about co-location, about the productivity gains that can be achieved by being nearby, close to each other. Well, now what we can then tap into by organizing the supply chain locally by leveraging on this proximity is the opportunity to cooperate with other firms along the supply chain. And if you can picture this flow of value added along the supply chain, hopefully you will see that the the incremental process from the initial inputs to the final output leads to complementary activities. So company A that is the one that provides the initial input, say the raw materials, passes these raw materials into company B, and then company B runs or performs some initial processing or manufacturing of these raw materials, and then gets some input, some kind of already with some value added into company C, and then this flow sort of continues along the whole supply chain by adding by each company at each stage, at each layer, if you will, of the supply chain, adding some incremental value. So we get the raw materials, we get the initial input, and then we get some value added along the whole supply chain. So because these activities are by definition complementary to each other, we will have plenty of opportunities to indeed exploit these commonalities and the complementary nature of these activities. So company A and company B, and company B and company C, they are complementors. They are not substitutes. If I may kind of go back to some basic sort of economic terms, probably many of you are familiar with this idea of substitutes and complementors. Well, by definition, companies along the supply chain are complementors, because they each company at each layer of the supply chain carries out a different set of activities that complements with the set of activities of the company that is next in the supply chain, and so on and so forth, all the way from the inputs, again from the initial input to the final output. So the idea is to, if you will, unveil or rediscover the benefits of cooperation with firms that run that carry out activities that are complementary to yours. They are not substitutes. So you're likely to face off many rivals that with which you compete head on because they do the same as you. So with these firms, you are not going to cooperate because they are full-fledged rivals. They are substitutes. They do the same as you do. But with the companies that have activities that are complementary, synergetic, complementary to yours, then the idea of clusters is that you kind of rediscover, you take a closer look at the benefits of cooperating with those activities by exploiting those commonalities and complementarities. Okay, so when you take a broader look, if you will, at the supply chain, you will see many complementary activities that open up opportunities for cooperation, coexisting. So at the same time, you will be also dealing with some head-on direct rivals with which you are not bound. Hopefully, you're not cooperating. With this, you are competing. So in a supply chain, and by extension in a cluster, you will have these dynamics of competition and cooperation coexisting. And then on the back of that, we argue that clusters illustrates, or clusters is one of the settings in which we see competition at play. So we have competition and competition and cooperation at the same time. How come that they coexist? The answer is they coexist because they take place at different levels of the supply chain. So you have cooperation when it comes to complementary activities, and you have at the same time competition with those firms that do the same as you, that have a nearly identical value chain. They carry out the same activities, and they offer the same value. They have the same value propositions. With those companies, you are bound to compete, and with the companies with which you have complementary activities, you can tap into the benefits of cooperating. Because by cooperating, you're likely to increase your productivity, either by reducing input cost because you share resources or you share input factors, or because through this cooperation you manage to increase the value of your output. And we are pretty much on time, but if I may borrow a couple of minutes just to finish off, when companies then when the supply chain is organized in these local networks, so when we have a local supply chain that we define as a cluster, so the intuitive, or if you will, another way to define a cluster is just think of a cluster as a local supply chain with firms that are close to each other. The outcome of these local supply chain transactions, of these dynamics, is likely to be higher productivity. So each firm in that location, each firm in that location is likely to increase efficiency, to higher productivity, is also likely to deliver higher value innovation. So we enter the dynamics of collaborative activities and open innovation, and so these concepts that I'm sure that many of you are familiar with, that result from complementary, from collaborative activities. And additionally, what we are likely to see in these local supply chains, in these clusters, is that the firms in those networks are more likely to specialize early on. And nowadays, when we are bound to face increased competition, because as we open up again, and under the assumption of open economies and free trade, we are likely to find sort of stiff competition in any industry. So companies, when if you're going to win in the long run, you are likely then to really narrow down the scope of your activities, and you're likely to specialize in very concrete activities in which you are really the number one, the provider of choice. So in hyper competitive markets, specialization is the name of the game. So if you're going to stay in the game, you very much need to specialize. In these local networks, we are likely to see a specialization early on, in the sense that because of these collaborative activities, companies are more likely to free up resources, because then they have some savings by partaking, some activities and collaborating in others. So with this now resources that have been freed up, the company can really invest in R&D, in specializing or in building up capacity in that specific attribute or in that specific activity that makes for the core of its competitive advantage. So you see that we need to come back time and again to the value chain, identify which activity is the ultimate driver of our competitive advantage, and really sort of specialize in that activity. If we are if we are facing tough competition, which is likely to be the case when we are in a free market, in a market dynamics. Oftentimes, though, in the region, in our region, here in Latin America, in the Caribbean, we are likely to see a number of market imperfections, and unfortunately, unfortunately for the consumer, these inefficiencies are ultimately, paid off by the consumer, but these market imperfections are likely to protect equally inefficient firms, from specializing. But if you are in a higher efficiency setting, with open competition, then you will need to specialize. You will need to really narrow down your core competencies, and a cluster can be a very powerful, if you will, fast track to achieve that, because through the collaborating activities, the collaborative dynamics of the cluster, firms can outsource, or, just offload some of the lower value added activities and concentrate in those activities that make for the core of their advantage. I can probably go on for hours. I just want to take, if I may, another minute or two to finish off with the key takeaways. I selected this slide for the value chain because I want to reinforce the message that competitiveness lies within the firm. So competitiveness is a value chain outcome. It lies right in there. For some companies, competitiveness lies in operations. For some other companies, it may lie in the way they organize marketing and sales. For some other companies, competitiveness may arise from the way they organize the supporting activities, HR, IT. Either way, this is company specific, but competitiveness it grows out of the value chain. So this is the key takeaway here. And what I wanted to kind of leave here as a food for thought, if you will, is that clusters as a choice to organize production regionally, so in a local setting, by way of agglomerating firms in a given geography, say in Puerto Rico or in Costa Rica or anywhere in the region. This proximity is indeed what unlocks these productivity gains that cannot be achieved for companies that are far away from each other. Organizing production in a cluster setting is not the magic formula. So don't get me wrong. I'm here sort of highlighting the potential upside of industrial clusters and this organizing production in these local networks, but we have to be aware that there are many ways of organizing your value chain, and indeed, what you have in front of you is the path of many companies in the Caribbean and beyond that choose to relocate activities uh, in various regions, so across the globe. And this is why we refer to this way of organizing the firm as a global value chain, in which some of the activities of the value chain are conducted locally, some other are conducted, in somewhere in Europe or somewhere in Asia or somewhere in any other location. The idea at the end of the day remains the same. You want to maximize output input, so you want to maximize productivity, and you may argue that those productivity gains, those benefits could be obtained or could be achieved by relocating some of your activities to a different uh, site, to a different location. Um, it is up to the company. It's up to the company to choose to run the activities locally and tap into the benefit of clusters, or to organize the activities globally and and uh, well uh, achieve maximize productivity by way of this multi-site value chain. The final slide that I selected is yet a reminder that we need the right context. So you cannot achieve competitiveness at the firm level, which is the ultimate driver of competitiveness, as we stated early on. You cannot achieve competitiveness if the business environment in which you operate, if that context is not conducive, that does not allow you indeed to capture those efficiency gains. So if you want a productive company, you need to have a productive business environment. And if you will, the quality of that business environment is defined by what we what we call the diamond model. So this is the analytical framework that we apply to assess location attractiveness. So we use these 4 dimensions um, to assess how conducive, how appropriate, how suitable any given location is for a given industry. So if we are in the business of creative industries, as I know many of you are, so is Puerto Rico a good location to really compete and operate and eventually, stand out and achieve long-term competitiveness? Is it the right location? Because if you are a competitiveness-minded firm, so if you really uh, try to fine-tune your value chain to stand out individually as a firm, but you happen to be in the wrong setting, so you can be the best firm in class, the best in class, but if you are in the wrong setting, um, you're not going to go far. So hopefully the intuition is pretty straightforward. If you want competitiveness, yes, competitiveness comes down to the firm. It's a firm level outcome, but you need that supportive uh, framework. You need that business environment in place, and the attributes of that context, of that business environment, are defined by the so-called diamond model that you have in front of you. We on this note, we conclude the conversation. I look forward to your comments and to your insights from now on. I just wanted, again, on a concluding note, to remind you that we need to somehow combine the context of the business environment with the competitiveness that ultimately takes place within the firm. So I hope you have enjoyed this conversation. I look forward to your insights and to your comments. And once again, I was delighted to be part of this event. And once again, a big thank you to the organizers, and a big thank you to the audience, and look forward to engaging in a conversation.